Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
Okay. Excuse me. Welcome to The Long Road. I'm your host, Chris Roberts. Get a little bit tired, a little bit off. I've been getting radiation treatment for my cancer. 33 down, only 7 more to go, and I'll be glad it's over with. And so, if I get a little bit tired, a little bit sluggish, that'll be the reason why. President Biden, a month late, but on March 10th, he presented his budget. His proposed budget is wish list for fiscal year 25. Congress just barely finally got around passing, finishing up the budget for 24. Well, this budget is a wish list. President Biden's proposed budget was $7.3 trillion. That's right, $7.3 trillion. But he said it's a good budget because he's going to reduce the debt by $3 trillion over the next 10 years. So people can go, wow, $3 trillion reduction. That is good. But federal government mathematics, federal government's finances are totally different than yours and my finances. There's gimmicks, there's numbers, and if we did it, if you or I did like the federal government, we'd be in jail for fraud, or we'd be bankrupt, or we'd be out on the street. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into some of the details when you go and look at the numbers and the line items. But first I'll go over, first thing with Biden with $7.3 trillion. This is his wish list. This is his campaign budget. What he proposed will not pass. A lot of stuff he got in here will not pass. If President Biden loses the election, then this the vast majority of $7.3 trillion budget will be thrown out the window. Okay? And so, but part of this budget is the 2017 tax cuts. They end next year. So there's changes that has to go. Do you extend the tax cuts? Do you modify the tax cuts and extend? Or you just let them all go out the door? Well, that's going to be a tough battle. That's going to be depending if the Republicans win the White House, the House and the Senate, I'm highly confident that all 2017 tax cuts will be expended, no matter how negative it is, will affect the debt going forward. If the president Democrat keep the White House and they take the House and the Senate, I don't know what will happen, is because when the Democrats are in control of everything like they did under President Obama for a while, nothing really gets done, because then they all start separating and going their own different ways. Because, for example, you had Blue Dog Democrats. They were more liberal on social issues, but they were fiscally conservative. Basically saying, if you don't have the money, why are we spending money we don't have? So those will go different ways. President Biden is proposing a $7.3 trillion fiscal year 2025 budget that would offset spending on his key domestic priorities, including tax credits for families, new money for housing by increasing taxes on corporations and the rich. He goes, my budget also makes key investment in child care and education, so every child in America can have a strong start. They need to thrive. Far too many hardworking families, it costs too much to find a good home. So we're working to lower costs and boost supply of housing nationwide. Well, it came out this morning in the top 100 metropolitan areas in the country, it is far cheaper to rent than it is to own a house. You know, for example, even in Keene, I think Keene is like around 350th to 360th metropolitan area. And like when we go in metropolitan area, you got Swansea, you got Peterborough, you got Walpole, you've got all this whole area that falls under the Keene metropolitan area, because all the other places are just small towns. President Biden has claimed that his tax and expenditure agenda will lower the deficit by $3 trillion over 10 years compared to current policy. So what we're going to do is later on, we'll go through the numbers, we're going to pick up on some of these things. Biden's budget, which assume caps on trillions of dollars from corporations and wealthy Americans, still envisioning $1 trillion deficits for the next 10 years. So President Biden is going to say, my budget, I'm making changes, so you really won't, we're going to make some changes up here. But when you look 10 years from now, if everything stays perfect the way it is, interest rates go down, we don't have a recession, inflation doesn't go up, you know, none of those negatives, interest rates going down, but no negative shock to the economy or anything, then we'll do good and we'll go down $3 trillion. Okay, for 2025, he plans to spend $1.8 trillion more than the government will collect in taxes. That translates to 6.1 GDP. And they like to use this GDP number, gross domestic product, because then they will go in and compare the gross domestic product to World War II. Oh yeah, we're only 6.1% of the budget. I mean, our debt is only 6.1 of the gross domestic product. Oh, okay. If I make $1,000 and I have 6.1% debt this year, I'm going to spend. So what that means is okay, Mr. Roberts, here's $1,000 to spend, but I go, sorry, I'm going to spend $1,061. Not really too much of a big deal, but I've been doing it every year. So next year, I get $10,000, and I go, oh, here's $10,000 to spend, Mr. Roberts. But you know what? I'm going to spend $10,610. So basically now in 2 years, I have $672 in debt. So 672 if I'm paying 6% interest on it. So look at that. So the interest every month I will continue paying, but I can't afford the interest because I'm spending more money than I'm taking in. So they go, well, you know, Mr. Roberts, you owe us $600, so you owe us $36 for interest for the second year. I go, hey, no problem at all. Just add it on to the $670 I owe. So now I'm up to $700. So each year goes, I keep paying, I keep buying more than what I get. And what I overspend, I just throw it on the pile. And then I can't pay the interest, so I throw the interest on the pile because by law, I have to pay the government debt. So no matter what it is, if I have to borrow the money to pay the government debt and then put that on the debt, you know, in most places, that's called loan sharking. Because no bank, no reputable government-controlled financial institution is supposed to be loaning you money just to take care of your debt. Because what is your collateral on that debt to pay for that debt? You won't have any collateral because you've overexpended. You're in a negative. Once you take the assets out, you're in a negative balance. By the numbers, Biden's budget would soon capturing trillions of dollars from corporation and wealthy individuals. He wants to increase taxes on corporation by $2.1 trillion over 10 years, but in part by increasing the rate companies pay from 21 to 28, while also capturing more of their foreign earnings. Well, okay, this is one of the more a political one. It'd say, well, you know, over the next 10 years, 2.1 trillion, if you was to come on an average, that'd be $200 billion a year. And when you look at the United States economy and things like that and transactions, the way the stock market is going, things like that, $200 billion a year in extra taxes is not much. Well, and also, wait a minute, I'm going to spend $1.8 trillion extra next year, and I'm going to offset that $1.8 trillion by collecting another $200 billion in taxes. Well, when I learned basic arithmetic, and I go 1.8, or even when I go, hey, 18 minus 2 still leaves me 16 that I can't pay for. So that 16, $1 trillion, I can't pay for. So I'm going to have to borrow $1.6 trillion just to cover next year's expenses and carry that forward the following year. And Mr. Biden says under his plan, basically, we will only increase the debt by 16.3 trillion instead of 19.3 trillion. Okay. So here's how the shell game goes. The president says he's going to reduce the next 10 years by $3 trillion. But he wants to increase the percentage that corporations pay and wealthy Americans pay. So that would be $2.1 trillion. So 30 minus 21 is 9. So basically, the spending doesn't stop. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And you're going in, this is how I'm reducing it. Because when you do tax plans and things like that, Congress, the Congressional Budget Office, what's called scoring, and they put it out for a 10-year period. So for like the tax break went for 8 years. So it looks like, oh man, it didn't really cost that much. Well, that's how they play some of their games. And then President Biden wants a billionaire tax that will impose 25% minimum on all earnings, including capital gains, which would bring in another $500 billion. So corporations go 2.1 trillion. Wealthy billionaires go $500 billion. So basically, billionaires would be forking up about $50 billion a year for the next 10 years, which brings it up to 2.6. So there it is. That's kind of how the game is played. You're not increasing taxes to reduce the deficit, reduce the debt. You're increasing taxes to reduce what the projected debt was going to be 10 years from now. So you can then go in, whether it's a Democratic or a Republican president, you can go in and do all you want in the next 4 years, and you go, hey, whether it's Biden or Trump, neither one has to worry about 4 years. Well, they have to be worrying if they're going to be alive in 4 years, or worry if they can put sentences together and or have a heart attack, dementia, or any of that. That would be their big worry. But they only got one term. Either one only has one term left in them. So they don't care what's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years out. This means that Biden is only extending some of his key priorities, such as enhanced child tax credit, only through 2025. Again, bingo to get the numbers. Under Biden's plan, parents would get an increased child tax credit, cutting taxes by an average of $2,600 for 39 million low and middle income families. 39 million. So you got $2,600. Okay. With $2,600, yep. When you're poor, you're low income, you're working at Walmart or McDonald's or someplace like that, every penny counts. But here's another trick. Okay. If I go in, President Biden says, okay, Mr. Roberts, you get some kids, you don't make much money, and I'm going to make sure you save, because you get 2 kids and everything, I'll make sure you save about $4,000. Oh, $4,000, yeah. And they go, then the other place, people go, oh, Mr. Roberts, you have another $4,000 a year, so I'm going to have to cut some of your SNAP benefits, and I'm going to have to cut some of your heating benefits because it's all based on income. And so it's not a straight 1-for-1, but it doesn't mean at the end of the year you have an extra $4,000 to spend, because part of that money would be going to make up for lost SNAP and lost heating assistance. Also, the president, that housing costs are painful, but he also wants to spend $258 billion to build or preserve over 2 million units. And also, increase home ownership. He wants to incentivize both sellers and buyers, providing $10,000 tax credits to sellers for 2025, and then up to $400 a month to first-time buyers to help them with their mortgage payments. There's a little that comes into socialism. Basically, that also comes into 2011, 2008, when we had the crisis. Okay. It doesn't matter if I give you a $10,000 tax credit. Okay. So I own my own home. Under Mr. Biden's thing, it says, Mr. Roberts, if you sell your home in fiscal 25 and you sell it to someone who has never bought a home before, a first-time home owner, I will give you $10,000 tax credit. Not a deduction, $10,000. So the American taxpayers would give me $10,000 to sell my home to a first-time buyer. Then the president wants to give that first-time buyer $400 a month, up to $400 a month to first-time buyers to help with their mortgage payment. Okay. The reason most first-time buyers can't afford to buy a house is try to find a house under $300,000 in Keene, for example. $300,000. So at a 6% rate, so you're looking at about 1.5. So that you would have to pay over the course of 30 years, $750,000 for that house, not including taxes or anything. A $300,000 house would also around this area would be about $10,000 a year. If you get a really good loan and all that kind of stuff, you'd be paying about $2,700. So bingo, 10. So you'd be paying about $30,000 a year for your house. You would be paying about $10,000 a year for your taxes. Ooh. But we throw in heat, we throw in electricity, we throw in food, we throw in car payments, things like that. You may be looking about having to spend about $70,000 to get into that house. You get into that house and these are just the basics that you have to pay. And depending, the president says, don't worry, we can give you up to almost $5,000 a year, but I won't tell you for how long to help you. So 70, so it means you come up with 65. You throw in Social Security, you throw in your tax and everything. Well, if you and your wife work, you might be able to get the $100,000, but you better not have any kids, because if you have 2 kids and they're young, you could be easily paying $12,000-$15,000 extra for daycare. Houses are really too expensive, and that's part of the problem. People are not making enough money to buy a $300,000-$400,000 house. Here in Keene, we're getting, I think it's Magola Way, up by, not Price Chopper, on the way to Swansea. They're building like 8 houses. They're going to be like $400,000 to $450,000. Nah, not really going to happen. So let's dig into some of the numbers. Right now, the federal debt is $34.6 trillion. It is increasing about $1 trillion every 3 to 4 months. That's it, $1 trillion every 3 to 4 months. When President Clinton left office, we had a surplus 3 years in a row. And under the projection, the United States Treasury said by 2012, we would be out of debt. We would have no problem whatsoever. But the Federal Reserve and its banks got involved because they make a lot of money off the U.S. debt, but that's for another show. Okay. For 2025, the president's budget projects basically $5.5 trillion in receipts incoming from everywhere. Well, when we look at Medicare, we'll look at Social Security, income dependency, Department of Defense, and federal pensions, just those 5 things, and interest, $5.9 trillion. So Medicare, Social Security, interest, defense, and federal pensions, $5.9 $5.9 trillion. That means there's no money to pay for anything else in the government, no money to pay for government services, none of that stuff. 5.9. So he's projecting a deficit of next year of $1.8 trillion. And so looking ahead, he's saying over the next 10 years, the federal government will take in $70 trillion and it will spend $86 trillion for a deficit of over 16 trillion, which would bring the total deficit by 2034 to $50 trillion. And look how he plays the game. In the first 4 years, from 25 to 29, the president's saying they're going to be taking in 31 trillion, spending 39 trillion. But the second 5 years, it's in 40 trillion and spending 49 trillion. So we get this. While I'm president, this is what we're going to spend. But the next president, unless he does something, his amount is going to go up. So, and when you look at it, debt held by the public. Right now, debt held by the public is, the way they do it, the public is 29.9, basically $30 trillion. Debt held by the public net of financial assets. So part of the account would add up all the stuff. And what the government is saying is the federal government has $2.6 trillion of physical assets, plus money in hand, coin, things like that. So, $2.6 trillion to cover $27 trillion. So our assets, as a federal government, our assets only cover 10 cents on a dollar. We have nothing to cover the other 90 cents. All of that is good. It's all based on the government's good faith to pay. Also making this pot look good, well, not good, but better than it is that the Federal Reserve owns trillions of dollars of government bonds because there wasn't enough people to buy them, or if they would have to increase the interest rate to get a higher rate. So right now, what they're doing, they're projecting in the year 2034, the federal government will take in 8.6 trillion, spend 10.3 for a 1.7 trillion. So it's like, for example, this year, 1.8, next year is 1.7, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, 1.4, then 1.6, 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, and 1.7. Okay? So we have got, you know what? I'm old, but for my children and my grandchildren's sake, we got to get those old people out of Congress. We got to get those old people out of federal office, because those old people are making decisions that make their life cozy and don't care about my grandkids, because they'll be dead by the time my grandkids grow up. So what the heck? Not their problem. Okay. Next year, they'll go in the receipts. They're talking about 18.7% of the gross domestic national product, and the federal government will spend basically about 25% of the gross national product, and comes up to 6.1. And what they have done is they have calculated the gross domestic product to keep growing. They're saying is we're not going to have any financial shock at all. And so as it keeps growing, so this year, that's 26.6, 25 is 6.1, then 5.1, 4.7, 0.7. So they predict that the end of 10 years, in 2034, the deficit will only be 3.9% of the gross domestic product. So they're saying, look, we've gone from a 6.6 to a 3.9. We have actually been reducing the debt. Total BS. You're not reducing the debt. You're projecting the money, the gross domestic product, to keep increasing so you can get the numbers down. But if you're saying in 2025, 1.781 trillion, and then 2035, it's 1.677 trillion, hey, you know what? If I keep the deficit at 1.7 trillion on average going out, and the economy keeps growing, what's the problem? I'm reducing my deficit of gross domestic product. True statement based on what they're projecting, but is it really truth? Is it defendable? In 2025, for the first time, the debt held by the public, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, all these different ones, will exceed 100% of GDP. And 102.2% will be held by the public. When you take out the financial aspects, it's 93.3. The real net interest in billions of dollars they're saying, by this, we're going to save $4.7 trillion in interest. So one of the things the president wanted to talk, expand access to child care and early learning. Okay, over 10 years, $600 billion. reduce the cost of health care, $470 billion. Some of the improve home health care, $154 billion. Expandable tax credit, $310 billion. Restore and make permanent the American Rescue Plan expansion of earned income tax credit for workers without any children. Because you had to have kids to have the earned income, but then when with COVID and everything, people who didn't have kids were allowed to get it. That would be $163 billion over the next 10 years. So this is discretionary funding. Okay, they hope to get $884 billion for the defense and constantly go up. In 2031, the defense would be $998 billion. In 2032, 7 years from now, they expect defense budget for $1 trillion. The Navy is about 80 ships short. The Air Force is getting rid of hundreds of planes. The Army is the smallest it's been since prior to World War II. The Army can't make recruiting quotas. They're getting rid of some of their special forces stuff because they can't get qualified individuals in. The Navy is having problems. Even the Air Force is having problems. Only the Marines and Space Force are meeting their quota. But the Army doesn't even have a physical fitness standard so you can make boot camp. You don't even have to qualify at the rifle range. If you go UNC, you can make it up later on. When you keep lowering your standards, the good people stay away. The non-defense discretionary, which is basically everything, SNAP, heating assistance, all this other kind of stuff, that's non-discretionary. Stuff that they don't have to. They don't have to give farmers loans or crop protection. They don't have to give money for roads and things like that. And one of the things right here, 2032, some of the states want to do away with able to sell a fossil fuel vehicle. Some by 2035. But I was thinking, how do you get the road use tax to build the highways, repair the highways and everything? You get gasoline, you have to pay a tax to the federal government, you have to pay a tax to the state. Hey, electric cars don't have to. Hey, I got a hybrid. I don't fill up as much as I used to. It doesn't mean I'm using less roads. I can get like 35 to 36 miles, and I can drive all around Keene and not use a single ounce of gas. So basically, I'm driving the roads free as a freebie, and other people are paying for it. But the non-discretionary funds, okay, 884 for Department of Defense and 995 for non-discretionary. So non-discretionary budget, the ones that Congress fights about, for 2025, $1.879 trillion. Okay, that's defense and that's everything except a few. Okay. Mandatory ones that they have to pay. So in 2025, Social Security expecting to be $1.5 trillion. In 2034, they expect it to be $2.4 trillion. So they expect to pay in the next 10 years $19.7 trillion for Social Security. You know, as baby boomers, one of the statistics I heard over and over and over again, but it doesn't mean it's accurate. That's about 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every year. So what they do is they're planning on spending $19.8 trillion, but they're only projecting to bring in 15.7. So they're projecting basically to spend over $4 trillion over for Social Security in the next 10 years than they take in. Medicare. Right now it's 936. They're expecting to spend $13.3 trillion on Medicare, and they're expecting to bring in $4.9 trillion. So between Social Security and Medicare, they're expecting to spend $33 trillion over the next 10 years. And at the same time, they're expecting to bring in $20.5 trillion. So over the next 10 years, Social Security and Medicare are going to be spending $12.5 trillion more than they bring in. And whether we like it or not, the Medicare rate has to go up. The Social Security age is going to have to go extend. They can argue all they want, but the number is right here. When are you going to come up with $12.5 trillion? The money is not coming in. And Medicaid is $7.7 trillion. Look, no money comes in for Medicaid. Under Obamacare, the federal government cut a deal saying that they would pay a certain amount for the Medicaid and the states would have to pick up the rest. There's a reason why a number of states haven't picked it up, because they're looking at the long-term projections, and if Medicare is going to be spending $7.7 trillion over the next 10 years, and they have no money coming in, where's that coming? Other mandatory programs, that's $11.4 trillion. Okay. And, okay, We're talking about going from 34 trillion to 50 trillion in 10 years. Okay? That's a lot of money. Okay? Net interest from 2025 to 2034 is $12.5 trillion. Non-discretionary funding to fund all the government, not counting Department of Defense, over 10 years will cost $10.4 trillion. At the same time, the interest will pay $12.5 trillion. How is the debt affecting us? The president is talking about housing. The president is talking about education. He's talking about childcare, early education, secondary education, building roads, building bridges. All that is non-discretionary funding. But we're going to spend, if we did not have to pay that interest, we would able to fund all that non-discretionary expense over the next 10 years and still have $2.5 trillion left over. So the mandatory expenses are going up, okay? There's no stopping them now. They're going up. More people going on Social Security. More people going on Medicare. Okay? You got 8 million migrants. You have to pay for them. You have to pay for education. You have to pay for special ed. All those low income, Title I programs, all stuff. 8 million people, where do you house them? The president says we need 2 million more houses based on our population right now. Now we got 8 million more people. Where do we put them? Where does the money come from? And when I was looking through and I was Googling everything, there's, quote, nothing in here that's covering the expenses for migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. 3 different categories. And so, also in this budget, there's nothing in this budget for natural disasters. We have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, we have earthquakes. You know what? Congress and the president do not budget for things like that. Okay? The president wants to give $60 billion to Ukraine. None of that is budgeted. Those are added on. We're firing missiles, $2.5 million missiles in the Gulf. Okay? When the United States runs out of those missiles, there'll be a special budget request to pay for those missiles, to replace them. Okay? It's costing more and more to bomb and do this, so we're going to need a supplemental like we had for Iraq and Afghanistan, because what we're saying is basically with the Pentagon getting $900 billion can't afford to go to war. All they can do is afford to fly their minimum hours, go to sea, because pilots are flying less and less hours, but they can buy a $13 billion aircraft carrier, $250,000 airplanes. They can do all this stuff. They can retire them early and get bigger and more expensive stuff. They have less people, but they're going to need more money because Op Tempo says they need more money. Going to need more money at the border. There's all these places, those will all come under what's called supplementals. They know it's going to happen, but they don't put it in. That's one of the big gimmicks that goes on. How do we keep the budget looking low? Well, on average, we have $50 billion worth of natural disasters every year. That should be in the budget. We have this and we have that. Those things are supposed to be in the budget. But they don't put them in the budget because they think we're stupid. They won't get a number. How can you go in and say, because I'm just about ending for today, in 2034, when we have $50 trillion in debt, President Biden projects 2023 and 33 and 34, both of those years will be over $1.5 trillion in debt. Interest payments. We are going to be owned by Saudi or China. Whoever buys our debt will own us. So that's all it for today. Time's up. Thank you.